No one has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Lantern Podcast. I'm so excited to be joined by my mental health and wellness ambassadors, Avni Hiriana and Francesca Gustav. I'm very excited that Cheska is joining us all the way from the US. Thank you for making time. I know that the time difference is brutal, but we're very honored to have you. And full circle moment for us, obviously, because you two were one of my first podcast guests earlier on this year, and sharing your insights and expertise on all things psychology, the intersections of mental health, and just your life journeys to date. So welcome.
Thank you.
So on today's podcast, we're going to be discussing why Gen Z is more open to talking about their mental health. So I'm interested in getting the insights, obviously directly from Gen Zers and psychology graduates, because you have that expertise and knowledge as well. So I'm going to start with Avni, and then you can probably answer, and then we can get to Cheska. I don't know how this is all going to work out. I haven't recorded with two people, so we're just going to have to see how it goes. Avni, what was your first encounter or experience when it came to mental health and well-being? What did you understand about that concept, and how has that evolved for you over time?
For me, when I came across the word just mental health, it got me thinking like very early on in my life, like what is it, what does it mean? I know about physical health, I know about any emotional health, but what's mental health, And obviously I didn't have the emotional understanding of even the word. So for me, it was just a basic word like, yeah, taking care of yourself, you know. And but obviously, as I evolved and I grew up, it just had a profound meaning to me. It meant more about elevation of yourself, basically. Elevation of my emotional state, elevation of my physical state. Um, and that's what the meaning carried out for me. And with my personal experience of mental health, it it was the meaning was just very different to me. But the journey was so beautiful, I would say. Now looking at my journey with mental health and my battles, obviously that journey was so much beautiful. And now the meaning that I carry with it and the whole outcome of my whole experience, just I would say that it was beautiful indeed. So that's what the meaning for mental health carries for me.
It's so interesting. I just want to observe that I think already in the first instance, I can hear that you already have such positive associations. There's been nothing negative or, any stigma attached to what you're saying. It seems like you've seen it as something that's been more so a part of life and not so much something that has defined you. It seems like you see it as something that you have experienced in the everyday, but not necessarily something that makes you a victim or somebody who maybe is not necessarily coping.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that it's a day to day, it sticks with you how you, deal with your mental health. It never stops, I would say.
Okay. Cheska, how about for you? What's your definition and how has it changed over time, if it has?
Um, I mean, mental health was something that I was always aware of since I was quite young. I knew I wanted to go into psychology by the time I got into middle school, so I was about 13 around that time. Solely because I understood that other people suffered a lot, and I think that the little social justice warrior in me constantly wanted to like help other people. So before, mental health to me was about helping other people and just like helping them seek what they define as happiness and what they define as self-care, good mental health, so on and so forth. But it started to change once I got to college. That's when I started realizing, like, oh, mental health applies to me as well. I'm obviously not a perfect individual and I have to do the inner work as well. But I think the reason why it wasn't necessarily important specifically to me for so long was because I was always too busy anyway. I was involved in like a lot of different organizations and sports and in really difficult classes like for most of my life. So I was really just focused on whatever the heck I was doing, and then I would help other people. And then it unlocked in me when I got to college, like, oh, I actually have to put in the work for myself, and I have to make sure that I am just as well taken care of the way that I take care of people in my life. So, yeah.
I find it very interesting that you said you saw it as not something that applied to you. Why do you think that was the case?
I think a part of it might be denial, when you come from a household, particularly when you're Black or a person of color, mental health is like very easily denied, by our parents, or whoever is really raising us. There is a negative stigma to it. And for me, it's not that I ever saw it as something negative the same way that my parents would see it, but I wouldn't apply it to me because I would just think like it's not that serious. I'm fine. I was kind of taught to just keep it pushing, like keep moving forward, like it's not that serious, like focus on what's important to you. Until I realized mental health is just as important to me as anything else that I'm involved in. So, yeah, over time, like the definition definitely changed for me because I learned that I had to put in the work to make sure that I'm just as good as the next person. And I kind of had to make it clear to my parents, like, no, you have to focus on mental health as well. We can't let these generational curses keep going where we just keep denying that we're feeling depressed or like we're just facing all these different demons.
Do you think that technology is what made you aware about mental health? Because I think you mentioned that it's something that you just grew up knowing about. So do you remember where was the first source where you heard about something like mental health?
Yes. I'm trying to like think if there's like a specific moment in my life where it really became pinpointed for me, but I guess it really became apparent to me when I was about 18 and I was in AP psychology. I was, of course, always aware of psychology beforehand. Like I mentioned, I was, interested in it since before middle school, pretty much. So I would watch things on like YouTube and whatever that talked about the concepts of mental health and psychology, but it didn't really start to apply and actually make sense to me until I got to like the end of my high school days.
Okay.
Mhm.
Avni, would you say that if you were educated about mental health formally from when you were young, like how Cheska's saying, she knew about it, but maybe it only necessarily sank in at 18. What do
Yeah.
you think would have been the difference in maybe your understanding of mental health? And I'm assuming this education didn't come formally from the household. And if it did, then obviously do let us know. And then I'm curious to know what were some of those informal lessons about mental health if it did come from a parental.
Okay, because my background is more like in Africa, and mental health is, I would say, not so new, but relatively new concept in Africa. And just talking about it was just not an option, not an idea, or it's something people thought that like, yeah, we just live by it, it's within us. We just live by it, and that's it. And they kind of sort of thing. So I would say if I was educated more about it, things would have changed within my experiences. But experiences just if it wasn't for my experience, I would have had a totally different meaning of literally everything. But I would say that with everything that was going on, with me struggling with my mental health, including me growing up, how I came across it was actually when I studied it in high school. When I took psychology in my A levels, I knew what I was going about. I was, what the basic understanding I had was and so I would say that that was when I received my first formal education about mental health, and that did change my perspective, because I was like, oh, okay, so it is okay not to be okay, I just don't have to stick it up and just like pretend like everything's okay. Because I think even teenage years are quite crucial, growing up, and at that time obviously you're still building your emotional intelligence. By then you're just trying to make an understanding of the world around you, the transitioning, making a decision like college, like university, and you all have all of these questions about your future, um, and your goals, and all of this comes along the way. So I would say my understanding of mental health changed from when I first formally experienced it in high school and basically gained some knowledge on it. So yeah, that would be my experience as well.
Oh, I mean, you've kind of mentioned the, I guess, taboo topic of like mental health in Africa. But it seems that Cheska, I mean, obviously growing up in the US, but in an African household, has had a similar experience to you, as in this is not something we speak about. We soldier on and carry on. But Avni, you also mentioned it's something that was inherent. Do you mean as in the mechanisms of coping were inherent, or is it because we're not talking about it, it's inherently assumed you know what it is and you know what to do about it?
I think it's more about talking about it, because like I mentioned earlier on, my understanding was like, yeah, what's mental health, So, because my background was like, yeah, I don't think I've heard that very early on in life. Like, what is that? So, I would say it begins by not talking about it enough. And obviously, in a country like Kenya, it wasn't talked much about it, and people just didn't have the knowledge about it. So, I would say it begins from that.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm curious to hear from you guys. How do you think we start those conversations? Because obviously there's structural barriers, there's systemic barriers, there's cultural barriers. It just seems like to have this conversation would require a whole lot of stakeholders, a whole lot of community engagement. So I guess the question I would ask is, if you were to rewrite, let's say, that part of your life, and obviously Cheska, this is specific for the US, Avni specifically for your African experience, how would you rewrite that in a way that you are well educated in mental health and you know how to actually take care of your mental well-being, other than like obviously venturing out on your own and having to figure it out?
Should I go first or should you go first?
Yeah, so
I would definitely say it needs to be implemented in the education system a lot more. I know that, at least in my school system, like they did talk about it, like in our health classes, but of course a lot of kids don't take it serious, like when you're young and you're kind of stupid. I hate to say it that way, but you are young and dumb, honestly, and kids are like quite silly or like don't seem to take things seriously because they don't really understand the severity of these situations, and obviously it's hard for them to open up about like their mental health because they don't really want to be seen as like vulnerable beings. So I think like the first way to start is implementing it in the school system in a way that reminds children that there's no shame in being vulnerable about what's going on at home, right? Because when we look at how schools are run, whether this be in the US or anywhere else in the world, there's always like a bully, right? There's always a kid that has issues going on at home and then they take it out on other kids, and constantly parents have to get involved and everyone has to tell this kid to stop being a bully, and no one really gets to the root cause of the issue, which is the fact that the child is going through something at home, right? So I think
yeah.
early intervention and understanding of the whole point of mental health and how it applies to those kids directly would be a lot more helpful rather than talking about it like it's a third party thing. Because I feel like the way that I learned about it, especially in like middle school, of course the teachers would be like, this could happen to you, but they didn't frame it in the way that's like, this is probably happening to a lot of you, you know, like this is the way to recognize that you are going through this, you know, or and not making it seem like these are things that you'll go through later on in life. Mental health is something that you deal with from the moment you come out the womb, really, you know. You're just unaware because obviously you're working on understanding other things. Like if you're a toddler, you're working on understanding how to use your hands and how to speak and, you know, sentence structure and things like that. But mental health is not the first thing that comes to mind, you know, especially when you come across a lot of kids nowadays. They struggle with emotional regulation. And that comes with a multitude of other reasons, right? They might have ADHD or autism. They might be developing whatever it may be that's, you know, like a mental disability or disorder. And yeah, it's just really up to us as adults to guide the children into understanding how important it is for them to be aware of how they're feeling and how to communicate it and be okay with being vulnerable.
I love what you said about the dissociation and, you know, teachers sort of educating it from more of a it could happen versus it will happen, because I think that that's probably where I don't want to say it goes wrong because I don't want to criticize the system. But I think it's probably in things like that, because I think it's what you said. First of all, if you already have an attitude of dissociation of it, and then also you don't think it applies to you, I think this is how one strays further and further and further away from it, instead of realizing that the accountability starts with you. So if then at that like fundamental infancy stage, if you're already aware that I'm accountable for my own mental well-being, because yes, bullying can happen to me. And I mean, on the topic of bullying, we know, like, as you progress later on in life, you have workplace bullies, which were probably the people who were bullied then become workplace bullies, because they are the people that actually then end up getting the power for some odd reason. And, you know, then trying to understand what is the psychological state of somebody who would engage in that kind of behavior. But you're right, these things stem from the playground. But for somebody who's a workplace bully, it probably is that dissociation of the experience of bullying. So they never really understood it. They understand it objectively and scientifically, but not as a personal experience. But thank you for that. That was very helpful. Avni, how would you rewrite your formative years when it comes to your mental health education?
I mean, like, as I mentioned before about the whole system, you know, where mental health doesn't exist back home, but I feel like, you know, children look up to the elders, you know, for emotional regulation, be it their parents, their carers, or their teachers. And as they start going to school, you know, they spend more time with teachers. And I think I do agree with Cheska that it should be taught in schools. And when children receive a more formal education on it, they're more likely to be receptive to it, you know, because in my experience, I never knew anything about it. I just had to question it, you know, follow my curiosity, and just find out about it, you know, and implement on it by my own experiences. And I feel like if I had received at least a formal background on it, I would be more receptive to even, for example, feel my emotions, you know, because again, going back to the schooling system, when the teachers is not, you know, um, fully attentive to how a child's emotional reaction is, it does cause damage. Like I would say, like, you know, it starts with all, like, you know, even not noticing things like conduct disorder or autism or ADHD, you know, the signs start very early on. So I think it also begins with the teachers and the schooling system, as well as the parents as well. But, you know, because children spend most of their times with teachers, you know, in school, and they're not formally educated at home. So, you know, I think it works both ways, like in your household and in the school. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely agree with you, and I think that's why I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done at all levels, because it's also an unrealistic expectation to think teachers know how to deal with mental health, because they were also not educated on the subject matter. So it's like the blind is literally leading the blind. You have a kid who doesn't know how to emotionally regulate, with parents at home who don't necessarily understand mental health, with teachers. So it's very convoluted, and when you really think about it, I don't even know how we've come this far without really diagnosing what's been really going on, because this is, it's pervasive, and it's been affecting, I think, us as a society in so many ways that we haven't necessarily realized. And I think, but by the time you're conscientized to these things, it might be too late, because I mean, I've been doing research on how the prefrontal lobe is developed by the age of 26. So a lot of the habits that you've learned, if you don't learn them before 26, it's very difficult to then adjust your mind. That's when they'll say like, oh, old people are rigid. It's not by choice, it's by circumstance and conditioning. Like physically, you need to have a whole different like brain for you to be able to even rewire whatever is in your like hardwire of what you've been taught growing up. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to these things. My next question that I have for you is, well, the two of you, is how do you think that technology and the loneliness pandemic and the rise in mental health has, I don't know, affected you? What has been your experience when it comes to those kind of topics, I guess?
Mm,
You want to go
I
first?
think, yeah, I think with technology, um, it depends on how you use it. You can either use it to benefit you or to destroy you. And my take on mental health would be, because I, as well, when I was quite curious about mental health, I relied on technology. Like just Googling, like, oh, what are the symptoms of depression? What are the symptoms of anxiety? What can I do to make myself feel better? What can I eat? Basic things like that you Google when you're in your teenage, like what foods, are gonna make me feel happy, basically. So when it comes to technology, I think you can create what you want to see. But I would say growing up, I would be exposed to a lot of, like on social media. Let's say like some, a video of just someone just, swearing and all of this, violent, you know, media that you don't want to see, even if it's just as an Instagram video. It's just something that really I feel like affects you. So my take is that on technology is that you what you want to see, but it can impair you if you focus on what you don't want to see. But even regardless, you have to create an atmosphere where you can move out from what you don't want. So that's my take. And yeah,
Francesca, before you answer, I just want to basically say my observations when it comes to Agni's answer. Your answer is very loaded, and I'll tell you why. Because in even giving somebody the prerogative to decide how to use technology, as you said, can be used as something either to destroy or to empower you. But I think the problem with today is that younger people are already disempowered in the mind. So this is why I think you have these social media activists asking for social media to be regulated, because they're of the view that they're not even able to regulate themselves. So you even giving somebody just the autonomy of deciding what to look at is even too much because they're not necessarily in the best state of mind. And then in having access to the plethora of resources at the touch of a button might not necessarily be the best thing. So I mean, I'm just giving the counter side too. I definitely agree with you. I mean, technology is amazing because it's also very educational, but I'm also on the other side of like, yeah, it can be also used to educate on the wrong things. So we
yeah,
need buy-in again now from people who are regulating social media platforms that, let's not have maybe harmful content or things that are negative, but One of the things that I personally can't stand about the algorithm is that it loves negativity. And this is something that I've just felt. That's why I don't watch the news. I don't want to ruin my day. I want to just vibe high. If something is really going wrong, I will know about it from somebody, but I don't necessarily go and look. I don't necessarily go seeking out that negativity from that avenue. But social media algorithms as well, I think, do a good job of like feeding negativity. And I don't necessarily subscribe to it. I like positive content, but it's unfortunate because my understanding is if you actually click a negative video, the algorithm feeds you more because it's understood that, oh, you're depressed, Afni, so here's more depressing content because that's what you like. Whereas it's like, that's not necessarily helpful for the person who's watching. So yeah, the technology one is tricky, but yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on that. But thanks for your insight. Sheska, what's your view?
Definitely, the internet is definitely a highly influential tool when it comes to how it affects the masses, and it pretty much dictates like how people move through life socially and personally. We see a lot of podcasts, for example, that spew hate. Honestly, like I'll just be completely honest, it spews hate. We see a lot of misogyny, for example, puts down women, and the LGBT community, people of color, so on and so forth. Like the list goes on and on and on, and it's really up to you to decide what content that you do want to like enjoy. When you look at people who are incels, unfortunately, like that, it's a horrible way to put it, but people who are incels, they tend to gravitate towards podcasts and content that they feel like they relate to, where they're just like, oh, women hate men and women this, women that. Like, they're going to go ahead and follow the narrative that they feel benefits them the most. But if they just step out into the real world and actually interact with people the way that they should, they'll actually understand that there are way more people that are loving and caring and want the best for everybody, as opposed to what the internet is constantly telling you, which is men hate women, women hate men, whatever, so it's really up to you to just dictate how your life goes, how you want life to really be about, rather than following what the internet says and just like blindly having faith in just a bunch of random people on the internet who like tell you what's up. And obviously we are a podcast as well, but our incentive is to make sure that people understand that they are not alone, because you had mentioned previously like the loneliness epidemic and that kind of idea. If
Yeah.
we take the time to cultivate a social society where we are more caring, loving, and understanding of each other, then naturally we would not have to deal with podcasts where we're seeing people just spew hatred and anger all day long, just because those people are lonely, just because those people don't understand that there is someone out there for them. There is a community that supports them and loves them. They just have to turn to them. But I think that's like the best way that I can put it shortly, I guess, because I could go on about how technology negatively affects us day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two of you have both highlighted pertinent points regarding technology because it can be used to educate, but I think this also sort of cements the need to have more formal education around mental health because some people may take what they see on the internet as educational truths when it comes to understanding mental health. And I mean, in the extreme cases, you may be seeing portrayals of mental health that may not necessarily be positive. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, people can approach a topic from a positive perspective, from a negative perspective. For obviously Seize the Light, we're very much into proactive mental health and positivity around mental health and things like that. Whereas there are some platforms where it's more negative. So I think that's why I think there needs to be more regulation around what people are seeing. But I think if minds are primed young from an early age, then we might be able to get around the issue of what's actually happening on social media. Just to go deeper into the loneliness epidemic, what has been your experience? Because my understanding is obviously that, Gen Zers, you were studying, or I think you guys were studying at the time of the pandemic, and apparently that's had a negative impact of their integration back into the world, because I think they're one generation which didn't really necessarily experience the world, how things were for like the Gen Zers, for example, who started work during the pandemic, don't know a pre-pandemic world. So how has that shaped your social circles, your life experiences? I'll hear from you there.
I think for me, the pandemic was more withdrawal from, the world, which was technically what the whole world was undergoing, withdrawals from each other. So it was, I would say it was quite hard because, withdrawing from your social circle, for example, you don't see the people, you see every day, just like your friends, that's same friends that you went to school with, like, and obviously that just creates loneliness within you because you're not even able to do the basic things like, go out without any restriction. Basically everything had to be restricted and not be free. So for me, it was more about a struggle of just wanting to be free, wanting to do all of these things without any restriction, But of course, we had to do them, not by choice. So I would say there was, on my end, there's just more withdrawal from, the outside world. It had its benefits and it had, its negative effects, but either way, it's both ways, I would say.
Yeah. But do you think your brain understood that this happened for a snapshot in time and that's not your reality? Because I think what's happened is that some people are still sort of stuck in that solitude mindset. That's what's also perpetuating the loneliness epidemic. Ever since people stayed in isolation and stayed on phones, technology, some people have sort of kept doing that. They haven't necessarily come back into society and reintegrated themselves.
I think it is a bit of a challenge, and to be honest, I see why. Because for about an year, you're just in lockdown. You know that you're not free, and you just want to be free, and then you kind of create an environment, for yourself that you just want to thrive in. But that's not what your reality is. It's totally different. And in that time stage where I believe most of the schools were shut down, and there's transitioning happening for people from high school to uni, and of course, which kid, which teenager doesn't want to experience that? There's a lot of excitement, but all of it is just forced to die down, and you end up creating a different reality for yourself to get accustomed to what's been happening. And I see why the transitioning after the pandemic to now is quite difficult because, of the basically the reality that we were currently living in. So, yeah, that's my take on that.
Okay. Thank you. Cheska, how about for you?
I mean, COVID was a different kind of time, honestly. Like, I feel like I embraced the fact that I was finally able to have time alone, if anything, because my entire life was pretty much like I did team sports. I told you I was in many organizations, like the list goes on and on and on. So I feel like that was my opportunity to finally enjoy being alone, if anything. And of course, no matter what, it sucked because in the back of my mind, I was worried because both my parents worked in hospitals at the time. So, there was always that fear that they would catch it and that they would be harmed by it. Um, but generally, I took advantage of it and tried to make it a more positive experience by focusing on things like, my mental health and meditating and checking in on my loved ones. The list goes on. Once I had to transition going back to school properly, like when I had to go back to campus, even though we had just spent like the last weeks of our last semester, going through online schooling, it was terrible. Like I hated it. Like it did feel genuinely lonely. Like I did not, it wasn't about enjoying my alone time anymore at that point. It was like, how the heck can I spend time with my loved ones without putting anyone at risk, you know? And it was difficult because I was also an RA at the time. I was a sports person, so I was on the volleyball team at school, and our entire season got canceled, and it had to get moved to the spring, and we only got to play 7 games, whereas in an average season we're playing about 35 games. So for me, it was like, damn, I'm gonna have to find a way to like just not let this affect me in a way where I start to feel profoundly lonely, and then it turned into depression, or it turned into anxiety and like me not knowing how to interact with other people. Um so yeah, like there's like a multitude of factors that go into how COVID affected me specifically, but I think it really affected everyone in a way. Evidently enough, the pandemic was not easy for anybody, and it really made them reevaluate what it means to be in social circles, what it means to spend time with family, what it means to really prioritize your community. And I know for me, the pandemic was more so about, okay, now it's time for me to really focus on me. I really feel like I took advantage of finally being left alone, because I had spent most of my life constantly being involved in my community and being part of team sports and different clubs, associations, whatever it may be. So for me, if anything, like the pandemic was an opportunity, but there was still a sense of fear, of course, because both of my parents were working in hospitals. So naturally, I think everybody had to experience some type of like loneliness or frustration or anything like that. I just know for me in the beginning, it wasn't like that. And then when I went back to university and we had to like be on campus, but we had online classes anyway, that's where it was like, okay, this is like this is strange and uncomfortable, honestly. And I know for me specifically, trying to learn online is not the same at all as being in class in person, where you can interact with your professor and you can spend time with them, ask more questions, interact with your classmates, and create group chats, whatever it may be. Like socializing is really about seeing the people in front of you. And I know that the internet has really tricked us into believing that we're not as lonely just because we're on the internet and we can come across other people on there that share the same sentiments and all that as us. But real and true socializing comes from doing it in person. And that loneliness epidemic kind of idea, I really feel like at this point, you got to find a way to get out of it. I hate to put it that way. And I know that people are still naturally affected by COVID, but this is life, unfortunately. And although it was a life-changing thing, it's up to you to figure out how to take the positives from it and how to move forward because of it. I know that some people are probably incapable or feel as though they're incapable of doing that because, some people had businesses, right? Like, and their business has not thrived the same ever again because of the pandemic, or they've lost people that they love. But the fact of the matter is that this can happen at any point in time anyway. Your business could change regardless of the fact of what's going on in the real world. You can lose people because of things outside of COVID, so it's really up to us to just face adversity with as much strength as possible, and not denying, like, you feeling lonely or you struggling with mental health and so on and so forth, and taking the steps necessary to make your life better and easier to handle.
Love your answer. I find it interesting that you were saying social or like technology. Sorry, let me rephrase. I find it interesting that you say that socializing using technology for you is not necessarily the same as socializing in person. Because with the article that I'm, basing this podcast on, it's actually suggested that older people who maybe struggle to find community offline in person could try and now form communities online, because obviously with online, there is the benefits of having no geographical bounds. So, maybe you don't get on with the people in your neighborhood, but you can find a friend in, I don't know, Timbuktu. But then that also alleviates your feelings of loneliness. So what do you think of technology and what you said about it not being real interaction for maybe older generations who are already apprehensive when it comes to technology, but maybe that could be a lifeline for them?
I mean, that's a great thing. Like I said before, technology and the internet are powerful tools, right? So you should use it to your advantage in a way that's going to make you a better person, and it's going to help you navigate life easier. If anything, no one wants to be lonely. So it's totally understandable that some people are incapable of that in their current situations, right? But it's also important to note that the internet is not reality. Some people are predators on the internet. They like to take advantage of people who are vulnerable. So it's up to you to try and use discernment and try to like educate yourself on who's really a friend and who isn't. And that sounds like fear mongering, but it's true. People will take advantage of you on the internet. And even outside of that, there are parasocial relationships, for example. There are people who like it's like one-sided relationships, if, for the viewers that don't understand. And a lot of celebrities go through this. People will be really into their content, posting, like commenting on all of their things, whatever it may be. And these people will genuinely think that they have a relationship with the other person, right? Or like the person that's posting the content, the celebrity. And that's scary. That's scary for the celebrity. I can't lie. Like there are people that end up going out of their way to stalk these celebrities and, figure out where they're going next and all these kinds of things. So it's really important to try and use these tools for positivity. Try to use these tools to guide you or help you in your time of need, but don't make it everything. Like if you're part of an online community that, like, let's say talks about eating disorders, don't make that your entire life. Just understand that it is a part of you that helped you get through handling the eating disorder, and you had a community that was there to help you handle that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one because, as I say, I think it's an interesting perspective that in the counter argument is that it can connect so many more people who were historically maybe limited by geography or circumstance, even finances, to be honest, because some people have actually made me aware that they actually can't socialize due to financial circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And that also got me thinking that, online platforms are actually great because you don't have to necessarily spend anything. This could have easily been a friendship group chat of us just catching up on life and not having that anxiety, well, social anxiety in the first instance, but also financial anxiety, because I think, again, a lot of our social interaction are revolving around finances, and it's detracting away from the objective, which is actually to check in on somebody that you care about. But now,
Yeah.
because we have to go to whatever coffee place and then buy the coffee, and
Mm-hmm.
people might not necessarily be in the best financial space to do that. And then now they're not going to get the benefit of a community. So
Yeah,
I
right.
think that
And
these are
and
all
the
things that,
unfortunate
yeah,
reality is that's because of the lack of third spaces that there are now. Like, there's if you literally look at kids now, right? Like a lot of young teenagers, they find themselves inside of Sephora. I remember when I was a middle schooler, young teenager, I could just go to the park. Now suddenly parks have entry fees sometimes. Like there's like they started taking away these spaces where people could truly enjoy themselves and build community. And now it's even harder for people to, or rather the younger generation especially, to grow up in an environment where they can just have fun without ever having to worry about the financial aspect of it. Like I know for me, it was so easy to just go to my dad and be like, hey, I want to go to the movies with my friends this Friday. And all he had to give me was $10 and I was all good to go. Now a movie could cost upwards of $20, $30 just to go, just because you want one small bag of
yeah.
popcorn and a drink and then the ticket. So honestly, it's unfortunate, but we have to get really creative in the way that we create these third spaces and are able to formulate these communities so that we don't have to sit here and sacrifice ourselves financially, because nobody is in a place right now where they can just keep sacrificing financially just for like a coffee once a week. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No, I mean, thank you so much. I mean, it adds to the conversation, and basically, like, as I said, I've just came across it and I found that so interesting because I was like, I'm like you guys. I also grew up in a time where I could have fun for free. But
Yeah.
now, I mean, particularly London, the train, depending how far you're going, sometimes you're like, wow, I'm going to tap that TFL twice. I can't really do that. So you probably like, try and do a few things when you go to one area. If you're trying to be prudent and safe, it's not necessarily the best. It
Mhm.
feels almost like frivolous to be living in that manner. And also when you're just conscious of people not even having the opportunity to do those kind of things, it just feels very frivolous. But then in understanding this is a basic need, like social interactions are a basic necessity, like even from a mental health perspective, just social connections
Yeah.
literally are the difference between saving somebody from whatever they're going through. But the fact that now there's this financial barrier to it, to me, I was like, this is it's sad, but it's something that needs to be spoken on. And basically, this is what we're also aiming to do, is making these little pockets of community where people can come and show up, even though it might be online. It's still community, and just elevating some of that financial pressure that we don't need to go anywhere. We can just come and check in. Obviously you pay your Wi-Fi, because I know that someone will come for me and say, for the very Wi-Fi, yeah, it's just the society we live in. You're gonna have to pay for something, but it's what can we do? But it's at least it's something other than like having those unnecessary additional costs. We're almost about to wrap up, but this has been really great and really insightful. What is it that you hope that generations that are, I mean, older than you, I would say, can learn from you as Gen Zers, and how you, I would say, basically like leading the charge on mental health, because obviously you've grown up around understanding the subject matter, understanding there's no stigma attached to it. What would you hope that the generations and society and the world globally could adopt moving forward for the future of mental health, and just normalizing it, because it's just something I think that needs to be normalized and viewed in a more positive light, and we need to have more proactive approaches to management. I will hear from Abni first.
I think what the older generation can learn from us Gen Zs is, well, in my experience, growing up Indian Kenyan, it's just that they were not very, let's say, like things like emotions, not very receptive to at least feeling them, or allowing at least others to feel, including children. Like, let's say a child is crying too much. Obviously, that child is crying because it's probably hurt. It's just unable to express. So it's just the child emotive. I would say just to allow people and yourself to feel your emotions, because that's what in my experience was. And I wish they can still continue learning from us in that manner, because obviously you look up to the adult for emotional regulation early on. And when they are unable to provide that, you end up getting stuck. You end up feeling numb. You end up just losing in touch with yourself as well. You just create this personality that just allows you to shield yourself constantly, not allowing anything in, having this fierce mindset, like, yeah, nothing bothers me and nothing ever gonna bother me, but in a negative way, more on the ignorant side, more on the avoidance side. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that maybe everyone, not only older generation, but everyone who is dealing with the mental health can pick up on. So that's what I would say.
I love that. I love that a lot. Oscar, what do you have to say?
I would say, I just want the older generations to understand that we collectively are tired. We are tired of having to constantly deny the fact that like mental health exists and that emotions exist. If we weren't meant to feel, we wouldn't. That's just the fact of the matter. But nature, God, whoever it may be, has created us to function this way. And it's up to us as a society to understand each other better and show each other care and true love, I guess you could say, and true support so that we can express ourselves in the most authentic way possible. And I feel like suppressing emotions and suppressing our mental health in general is counterproductive, and it's sad, I'll be honest, because to ever sit here and feel shame or guilt about how you feel is like it's the worst feeling in the world. So I would want the older generations to just understand that we just don't want to carry this generational curse where we will someday do the same thing to our kids and not make them feel validated in their experiences, whether they're toddlers or full grown adults, you know? And I feel like, especially like as a parent, your, I guess, job is to make sure that your child is in the best possible mental space that they can be in so that they can thrive, you know? So I would especially want parents to understand, like, before you get upset with your child, take a moment to understand them. Whether you're like a guardian, a parent, grandparent, doesn't matter. Just take the time to listen and understand before you tell them how they should feel or how they should navigate life. Because, like, especially for me, like, you know, my dad is a bit of a hard parent, you know, but he does it with love. But oftentimes, you know, he'll just be like, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't think this way. And for me, it's like, but I do. I do feel this way and I do think this way. And I either have to take the time to be understood and heard properly, and then I can rearrange my thoughts or rewire my brain to think differently. I just need to be acknowledged. I need my emotions to be acknowledged. So I would really want the older generation to understand, like, we're not doing this to be annoying. We're not doing it because we're sensitive. We're just aware. We just want change. That's it. Like, we don't need the judgment to come with it. We don't need the stigma to come with it. We just want to be recognized and understood. It's that simple.
You both gave such great answers, and I love your takeaway points and what you're hoping for. And I think that that's just in alignment with what we're trying to do. It sees the light, hopefully, you know, just reducing the stigma, making people understand what these things really mean, but also giving practical strategies of how to, you know, progress in society and us creating a more compassionate future. Because at the end of the day, we are an intergenerational society. So we do need to get to a point where everyone is understanding everybody, because it's either we're working together, we're at school together, we're in the same neighborhood. So I think it goes back to one of the initial points that we discussed. It's like having a dissociated attitude is not necessarily going to move the needle if you're just talking about it from a helicopter point of view of, I hear that this is happening, I hear that, then we're not going to really move the needle. And that's why I think also having platforms where, you know, personal stories are told and people are validating people's feelings and experiences, and also lived experience, because a lot of solutions around the tech-based approach to mental health, I'm not necessarily sure about that, because it's AI driven. It doesn't take into account lived experience. It's not personal. It doesn't build community. It just makes the younger generation sit on their phones longer than they should be, not making friends. I think it's counterproductive in my opinion. So yeah, I think that there's a lot that needs to be done, and everybody can still play their part individually, because that's the only way we're going to be able to move the needle and live to our full potential, each of us individually, because that's how I think it's going to happen. Yeah. So should we, I mean, I don't even have any of those like sophisticated closeouts for this podcast. I probably should think about one for next year, to be honest, of having something that's, you know, I have across the board for all podcasts. But I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts, observations, or anything you want to leave with the audience before we leave. Cheska, you can go first.
Stay positive, stay happy. It's really that simple. You know, don't give too much energy to don't give too much energy to the things that might feel like they're tormenting you, you know. I know, like, for me, obviously I've spoken to you briefly about, you know, like how life has changed a lot for me this past year. And I rightfully had a lot of like anger and frustration in those moments where like I felt like things were changing in a way that were not ideal to me. But when you look at the bigger picture, things change the way that they're supposed to. And, you know, just look forward to a brighter and happier future for yourself. Try and look for the positive in everything. And I know it can be hard, especially when you're in a time where you feel like you might be depressed or you're like operating in anger. But once you get out of that phase where you realize like I don't have to be angry and there's nothing to really be angry about, I just needed to acknowledge those emotions and then move forward and see how I can make the change necessary. Let the anger drive you to a better place rather than to a darker place.
I
Well
love
said.
Daphne.
I would just say that, take some time, take some patience, to acknowledge how you feel. Vibe high. You create your own energy, and that's what I personally lead with. And I'm in alignment with what Jessica said. Use your anger and your frustrations, because these are known as more like negative emotions, I would say. But they're just emotions, nothing negative, nothing positive. It's just what you make the outcome of it to be. How you spearhead into it is what defines your life. So that's what my suggestion would be.
And thank you to the two of you for contributing to this discussion. I'm really hoping that for the Gen Zers that are listening, they will feel seen and heard and validated, because I'm mindful that there are people out there that don't have people around them to validate their feelings at an academic level, in society, at home, online, and they might be feeling very alone. So we hope that they will come across this podcast and understand that it's normal, and how what are the mechanisms to work through whatever they're feeling. So thank you for coming and contributing to the conversation today. And yeah, we will pick up offline after this podcast. Thank you to everyone who got this far in the podcast. And the Lantern podcast will see you next year in 2025. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Seize the light within yourself with love, the Lantern.